Hello everyone, this is War Crimes Uwu, and I am blessed to be bringing you another limited guide, this time for the upcoming Magic the Gathering set, Duskmourn House of Horror. We've got a horror-themed set that takes place inside of a plane that's been consumed by one gigantic surreal mansion. Very interesting concept, not a huge fan of the 80s horror stuff thrown in. It feels like we've transitioned from interesting worlds built by the Magic creative team to riffs on movies I haven't seen. But be that as it may, this set looks mechanically very interesting. We're seeing some callbacks, some enchantment creatures, delirium coming back, as well as some new interesting mechanics that we'll get into. So without further ado, what are we going to get into today? We're going to talk returning mechanics. We're going to talk new mechanics. We're going to talk the best commons and uncommons of each color to keep a lookout for in your draft and your pre-release. We're going to talk about the limited archetypes that you're intended to build or draft in the set. We're going to talk about the best bombs in the set, rares and mythics. And then I'm just going to give you a few miscellaneous tips and tricks. As always, these guides are intended not to go over and give a rating to literally every card in the set, but just to give you a guide that will be helpful in your pre-release or draft. Basically, my goal is if you only have an hour to learn about this limited format, that my limited guide would be the best use of that hour. And, of course, I'm thankful for everybody who watches the video. Feel free to give a like or subscribe if you feel like it's helpful at the end. And without further ado, let's discuss the returning mechanics in Duskmourn House of Horror. We've got Delirium. This debuted in Shadows over Innistrad block, and essentially it's cards that turn on an additional ability if you have 4 different card types in your graveyard. So this here hand that feeds, when it attacks, it gets +2/0 and menace if you have 4 different types in your graveyard. Stuff like that. It's not always going to be the same payoff. It's similar to Landfall in that way. And this set, you'll notice, features a lot of enchantment creatures, a lot of artifact creatures, removal that's like in the form of an aura. And the purpose of that is to, without affecting the play of the game, where like you have, creatures removal, the fundamentals, it still diversifies the number of card types in your graveyard for those Delirium purposes. You'll find also that Delirium interacts interestingly with several of the other mechanics we'll talk about. So that's Delirium. And then we've got a returning-ish mechanic. This is Eerie, and I say returning-ish because it's the same as the mechanic Constellation, but with a small twist. Basically, what Eerie is whenever an enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room, each opponent, or something happens. In the case of this first card, it's each opponent loses 1 life, the other guy gains lifelink, this guy gets +2/0. There's a lot of different triggers that Eerie can do. But it's basically just Constellation from the original Theros block and Theros Beyond Death, but also triggers when you fully unlock a room. So what is a room? Good question. These are rooms. It is a 2-sided enchantment, so think kind of like the split cards from the Ravnica blocks. No, I guess from Invasion block, but that was before I was born. So each of these has 2 sides. You've got when you unlock this door, you do something. Sometimes it's that triggered ability. Sometimes it's a passive ability that you gain access to once the door is unlocked. These are kind of similar to, like, think of classes, except you can pay for them in any order. Basically, as a special action at sorcery speed, once you have one side of it on the board that you've paid for on the stack, you can pay the cost of the other side and immediately unlock it and gain access to that effect as well. Rooms are across rarities. There's 2 commons and 1 uncommon room in each color. And then there's, several rare and mythic rooms as well. So these are enchantments for the purposes of Eerie. They can each trigger Eerie twice, because they trigger Eerie when you fully unlock them, when you unlock the second side, stuff like that. And next we've got Survival. This mechanic's pretty simple. Basically, it's another one of those italicized mechanics, ability words, which means that when you have to fulfill some sort of condition, and then a different thing will happen depending on the card. So the condition for survival is at the beginning of your second main phase, if the creature is tapped, something happens. And the most common way this is going to happen is obviously attacking, and then hence the name of the mechanic, surviving that combat to get that benefit. Although you can also, there are several ways in the set to tap your own creatures to trigger those survival abilities, even if the board is not favorable for them to attack and survive. And as well, you can like crew a vehicle to survive, which is kind of flavorful, right? They're escaping in their getaway car. So survival is a mechanic that is across only 3 colors, but it's primarily in white and green. So we'll kind of talk about that. It's also one of the limited archetypes is built around survival, so we'll talk about it more there. And then we've got another new mechanic, Manifest Dread. Now, this is kind of a riff on the Manifest mechanic from Fate Reforged originally. So the way that you manifest Dread is you look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature, and the other into your graveyard. Turn it face up at any time for its mana cost if it's a creature card. So you are manifesting off the top 2 cards of your library. You get to put one onto the battlefield face down and one into your yard. In fact, here in the middle is Manifest Dread, which is a sorcery with Manifest Dread. I believe it's the only Magic card whose name is identical to its rules text. I may be incorrect about that, but I'm pretty sure that it is the first. But basically, you get some card selection, which allows you to hopefully ensure that you're at least getting something you can flip over for some advantage. And at the very least, you're getting to get some card selection about what you put in your graveyard. So that's obviously going to fuel your Delirium cards, right? If you get to look at the top 2 cards of your library, and one of them can put you into Delirium, you get that decision. So very cool mechanic. I think it'll play really interestingly in Limited, although, combat can get a little bit awkward, and if players have face-down creatures, it kind of disincentivizes attacking, so we'll see if that slows down the format a great deal. But yeah, there seem to be some powerfully costed cards with Manifest Dread, so I'm eager to see how that ends up. Next, we've got Impending. Now, this mechanic you're probably not going to have to worry about in most limited matches, because it is only on a cycle of mythics. Basically, if you cast the spell for its impending cost, which is always cheaper on these, it enters with 4 time counters, and it isn't a creature until the last one is removed. At the beginning of your end step, remove a time counter from it. So basically, they can be enchantments that don't have that aren't creatures, don't have stats, kind of like the Theros gods when you don't have enough devotion. But they, after a certain number of turns, they will become a creature. And you can... There's no ways, as far as I'm aware, within the limited format to accelerate that by removing counters. But they all have a trigger when they enter the battlefield or attack. So if you impend them, you're going to get that enters the battlefield trigger immediately. But you can also just cast them for their mana cost, depending on the stage of the game that you're in. So that's the new impending mechanic. Next, we're going to talk about the best commons and uncommons in each color. So as I'm going through these, I want you to kind of comment if you feel like there's anything I missed, if you feel like there's anything that's like, whoa, you're crazy, this is not good enough. I like a conversation in the comments. So yeah, let's jump into the best commons and uncommons in each color. As always, we're going to start with what I think are the best white commons. So we're going to start with Fear of Surveillance. Really cool art, I gotta say. This reminds me of the old Kamigawa Spirits. I just love the way this thing looks. So Fear of Surveillance, 1 and a white for a 2/2 Nightmare with Vigilance. It's an enchantment creature. And whenever Fear of Surveillance attacks, surveil 1. So this is just a generically good card, right? Enchantment creature gives you a little bit of a buff to your ability to get Delirium in your deck. That surveil doing the same thing. But it's just a decently statted creature. As long as it doesn't just get eaten, you can attack with it and get that surveil trigger because it's got Vigilance and it can still block. I think it's just got a lot of text for a 2-mana 2/2. So happy to see that. And then we've got Unsettling Twins, 3 and a white for a 2/2 human. When Unsettling Twins enters, Manifest Dread. So again, that's look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 and the other into your graveyard. And you can turn that face down, face up at any time for its mana cost if it's a creature. So, how much better is this than just 2 2/2s for 4 mana? I think it's quite a bit better, right? The next turn you're untapping almost any creature you're going to be able to flip over whatever you got off of this Unsettling Twins. And again, you've got that card selection, so you're more likely to get a creature that you are happy to have off of this. So I think this card is actually sneakily very powerful. I think it's one of White's best commons. And then we've got Hardened Escort. This is 2 and a white for a 2/4 human soldier. Whenever Hardened Escort attacks, another target creature you control gets +1/0 and gains indestructible until end of turn. So that 4 toughness is going to help make sure that this doesn't die in combat, and you can let maybe a frailer creature, I think specifically the intention here is a creature with a survival ability, make sure that they can get through combat to get access to that survival effect, or just push through damage to apply pressure to your opponent in a more aggressive deck. So this common is going to be very helpful. It comes down, it blocks well, and then on the following turn, it's going to make sure that one of your other creatures, maybe one of your lower toughness or frailer creatures, can get in. So those are our white commons. We're going to move on to the best uncommons in white. We've got some beautiful Dominic Mayer art on this one. Shout out to Dominic Mayer. Exercise 1 and a white for a sorcery. Exile target artifact, enchantment, or creature with power 4 or greater. So this is just a ton of flexibility, right? Because of the Delirium theme in the set, a lot of the creatures end up being artifacts and enchantments anyway to enable that. So this just is a lot more flexible than it even looks. That power 4 or greater, is not going to get met that often, but I think that this card is flexible enough that it warrants mainboard inclusion and ends up being a very good mono white card at uncommon. And then we've got Patched Plaything. This is 2 and a white for a 4/3 artifact creature toy with double strike. It enters with 2 -1/-1 counters on it if you cast it from your hand. Now, so basically you can look at this as a 3-mana 2/1 double strike, which is like fine. It's a great receiver of buffs in the form of +1/+1 counters, in the form of auras, equipments, whatever. But the other thing is there are several cards that reanimate in this format. Reanimator, we're going to get into it later, is one of the limited archetypes. So this card is a pretty good target to reanimate, right? A 4/3 double strike is nothing to sneeze at. And some of these reanimator spells in the set actually call out specifically something that costs 3 or less. So you're getting an insane rate on that if versus what maybe you would expect to get off of it. And then the last uncommon white card we're going to talk about is Lionheart Glimmer. 3 and double white for a 2/5 enchantment creature, Cat Glimmer, with Ward 2. And whenever you attack, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Now, that's an important line of text. Whenever you attack, not whenever Lionheart Glimmer attacks. So you can leave this 2/5 blocker back and still buff the team, create much more favorable trades, much more favorable attacks, and not have to actually send this in and risk it getting killed. Also, it's a trigger, right? So some of these Anthem effects on creatures are risky because if they kill the creature at instant speed, you're going to lose that buff. But because this is a trigger, they either have to kill it before combat and then you don't have to swing, or kill it after you've attacked and then you've already got the buff. So Lionheart Glimmer, I think, is going to be slept on a little bit. That Ward 2 is also going to make it a lot harder to kill. So, yeah, I think this card is just a very good uncommon, especially to kind of top the curve in an aggro deck. Next, we're going to move on to the best blue commons, and here's the first room we're actually going to read out loud. So we've got Meatlocker / Drowned Diner. So Meatlocker is 2 and a blue for an enchantment room. Whenever you unlock this door, tap up to 1 target creature and put 2 stun counters on it. And then the other side, Drowned Diner, 3 and double blue. Whenever you unlock this door, draw 3 cards, then discard a card. So I think this card will be really useful for a sort of control deck, one that's going to care about these enchantments entering, because that Meatlocker is not a removal spell exactly, but it's going to take something out of commission for a few turns while you find an answer or while the game outpaces the thing that you used it on. And then that Drowned Diner is going to be a source of card advantage later in the game once you've maybe stalled out. Next, we've got Tunnel Surveyor, which is 2 and a blue for a 2/2 human detective. When Tunnel Surveyor enters, create a 1/1 white glimmer enchantment creature token. So that's a token that's created by a few cards in this set. When we look at this, we're going to compare it to things like Plume Creed Mentor, and not having flying matters, but the fact that these glimmer enchantment creature tokens entering will trigger your eerie effects. I keep wanting to call it Constellation. They'll trigger your eerie effects and allow you to get benefits off of that, as well as just, your stats being divided between 2 bodies on your 3-drop. Just feels pretty good. So I think this will be one of Blue's better commons. And then we've got Twist Reality. This is 1 and double blue for an instant. Choose 1, counter target spell, or Manifest Dread. Now, counterspells get a really bad rap in Limited, and for good reason, because if you are leaving one up, 90% of the time, you are giving up on casting something on your turn, right? To leave the mana up is to eschew being able to spend the mana on your turn, and most of the cards you want to play in Limited are going to be Sorcery Speed, right? So if you want to leave up a counterspell, you're giving that up. But with Twist Reality here, you have the opportunity, if you're leaving just this card up in your hand, you have that counterspell if that's how you actually want to use it, and then if you don't, you're not going to lose tempo. You get to just Manifest Dread on their end step, right? Put something in that if it's really good, you can end up just flipping it on your turn after you untap. So this card's great because it gives you that counterspell, but the other option is not just drawing cards or something that also doesn't affect the board state. The other option actually affects the board state. You can also, in a pinch, make that 2/2 in combat to block something and trade. Next, we've got the best blue uncommons. So this is first one is Stay Hidden, Stay Silent. 1 and a blue, enchant creature. When Stay Hidden, Stay Silent enters, tap enchanted creature. Enchanted creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. 4 and double blue, shuffle enchanted creature into its owner's library, then manifest Dread. Activate only as a sorcery. So this card is pretty solid. These claustrophobia effects have kind of fallen behind the curve in limited, but only having to pay 2 mana for it is really good. Excuse me. And the fact that later you have 6 mana lying around, you can not only just get rid of the creature permanently, or I guess semi-permanently, they could draw it again, but get rid of the creature semi-permanently, and put a body on the board, get some card selection, or get some selection for the body, I guess. I think Stay Hidden, Stay Silent is premium removal in blue, and I think it's one of its best uncommons. Next, we've got Fear of Falling, 3 and double blue, for an enchantment creature Nightmare. It's a 4/4. It's got flying, and whenever it attacks, target creature defending player controls gets -2/0 and loses flying until your next turn. So this isn't going to take a creature like completely out of combat, right? It doesn't lose all its abilities, so you can't make a creature that is more relevant for its abilities irrelevant. But you can take an attacker pretty much out of commission. You can get rid of a flying blocker that could block this, and then it's a pretty solid clock. I think the flexibility on this card and the extra bonus it gives you just from attacking makes this pretty crazy. And then we've got Flood Pit's Drowner. 1 and a blue for a 2/1 merfolk with Flash and Vigilance. And when Flood Pit's Drowner enters, tap target creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. But that's not all. 1 and a blue tap, shuffle Flood Pit's Drowner and target creature with a stun counter on it into their owner's libraries. So, this card is really, really good. It's an insane tempo play. Just the ability to flash this in on your opponent's turn, tap something down, like before combat, and then it doesn't untap on their next turn, that's just brutal. But also, if you need this to be a permanent answer to a creature, or again, I guess semi-permanent because it shuffles it back into the library, you can just do that too. You can flash it in, tap the thing down, and then untap, activate it, shuffle that thing away. So, very flexible, but also just a very solid, 2-drop tempo play. This card's very good. Next, we're going to move on to the best black commons. We've got Appendage Amalgam, 2 and a black. Whenever Appendage Amalgam attacks, surveil 1. It's got Flash. Sorry, I'm reading this all out of order. It's 2 and a black for a 3/2 enchantment creature, Horror, with Flash. Whenever it attacks, surveil 1. So this, I think, is going to end up being right at home in the Delirium decks, right? It has that enchantment card type that's going to add maybe an extra card type to your graveyard, and it allows you to put things in the graveyard whenever you attack. The 3/2 body's decent. I'm imagining you flash this in, swing, you get that surveil, and then it probably trades with something because your opponent doesn't want you surveilling every turn. But I think this card is great, even in that scenario, which I think is going to be the average scenario for it. Obviously, you're going to feel super great when they attack with something that this eats, which is not going to line up super often, but it can. And then we're going to read out this black common room. We've got Derelict Attic / Widow's Walk. So Derelict Attic is 2 and a black. Whenever you unlock this door, you draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. And then Widow's Walk, whenever creature you control attacks alone, it gets +1/0 and gains Death Touch until end of turn. And that's 3 and a black. So this card just being Sign in Blood for 3 is rough. This other effect is technically inevitability as long as you have a creature out, but it's not great. But I really think this card is greater than the sum of its parts. Just having both halves of this enchantment on one piece of cardboard is going to make up the difference. Then we've got Fanatic of Harrowing, 3 and a black for a 2/2 human cleric. When Fanatic of Harrowing enters, each player discards a card. If you discarded a card this way, draw a card. So it's weird, we don't really see rummaging in black. That doesn't feel color pie correct. But you do get to make an opponent discard a card, which is, not quite good enough for a 4-mana 2/2. But when you add the ability to rummage onto it, especially in a format with Delirium, in a format with a Reanimator deck, this guy feels pretty good to cast. to sort of curve into a bigger turn where you like cast a reanimator spell, or something similar. So we've got the best black uncommons. We've got Nowhere to Run. 1 and a black for an enchantment with flash. When Nowhere to Run enters, target creature an opponent controls gets -3/3 until end of turn. Creatures your opponents control can be the targets of spells and abilities as though they didn't have hexproof. Ward abilities of those creatures don't trigger. So, of course, for those of you who don't know, even though they're listed in that order, basically, you can target your opponent's hexproof creatures or ward creatures with this ETB trigger, which I think is the intention. But even ignoring that sort of corner case, I think 2 mana for -3/3 is a very good rate at instant speed, so we're happy to see this as one of our uncommon removal spells. Speaking of uncommon removal spells, we've got Sporogenic Infection, 1 and a black for an aura with enchant creature. When it enters, target player sacrifices a creature other than enchanted creature. When enchanted creature is dealt damage, destroy it. So you can basically, this is like a sack spell, except you get to make 1 creature immune from that sack spell. So if they have 2 creatures, you get to kill the thing you want with it, obviously. And then also that creature has reverse death touch. Everything that damages it has death touch, basically. And that's really helpful, not only just because it's a little bit of upside on your Chainer's Edict, but also because it allows you to pretty easily put this enchantment in your graveyard for the purposes of Delirium. Next, we've got Vile Mutilator, and this is probably the best reanimator target in the set at common and uncommon, but it's also, not that unrealistic to cast. So it's 5 and double black, so 7 mana, for a 6/5 demon. As an additional cost to cast this spell, sacrifice a creature or enchantment. It's got flying and trample, and when Vile Mutilator enters, each opponent sacrifices a non-token enchantment, then sacrifices a non-token creature. So the non-token is pretty cool here. Making sure that even if they've left like a Glimmer lying around, they have to sack a real creature to it. This thing's going to obviously end games. It's a huge swing, especially if your opponent controls both an enchantment and a creature. Maybe they've got a room that they've fully activated that they've invested all this mana in, and it's just gone now. And this guy is obviously really good to reanimate, as we'll get into later with that deck. So I think this card's great. It reminds us of that card from Strixhaven, where like you have to sack a creature, discard a card, or pay 4 life to cast it. And when it enters, your opponent does all those things. So this is kind of reminiscent of that. Next, we've got the best red commons, and we're going to start with this room that I think is really powerful. It's Glassworks / Shattered Yard. So Glassworks is 2 and a red. When you unlock this door, this room deals 4 damage to target creature an opponent controls, and then Shattered Yard, 4 and a red. At the beginning of your upkeep, this room deals 1 damage to each opponent. So, longtime viewers will know my favorite card in every set that has one is the 4 mana black enchantment that drains your opponent for 1 life every turn, and you gain 1 life. In the last set, it was an artifact, and you could, sack it to Sign in Blood, so they keep making it better and better, because it's usually not that good. I love Ill-Gotten Inheritance, that was one of my favorites. And this is sort of close, right? You're obviously not gaining life, it's a red card. But it is just like the extra text on a pretty decently costed removal spell. 2 and a red for 4 damage is not something that anybody's going to be too mad about having to play. And then late in the game, you just don't have a better option. 4 and a red, just... every end step, I'll ping you for 1. That'll eventually kill you. So, in a gummed up board state, or when you're both in top deck mode, having played this earlier as a removal spell feels great. You can also play it as the removal spell and then sack it to something. There are a number of things that let you sack permanents, sack enchantments specifically for advantage in this set. And then we've got Impossible Inferno. Personally, I prefer Beyond. It's 4 and a red for an instant. Impossible Inferno deals 6 damage to target creature. And then Delirium, if there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, exile the top card of your library. You may play it until the end of your next turn. So these 5 mana for 6 damage removal spells never are what you are excited to play, right? We got one in Outlaws at Thunder Junction. It feels like we won in most sets. And usually it's like, I don't have good removal, so I've got to play this. I do think that the potential extra card, and it is basically drawing a card because it gives access until the end of your next turn, and you're at 5 mana already. I really do think that this is one of the better iterations of this card. Remains to be seen whether that'll kind of push it over the edge into being removal that we don't feel as bad about playing. But it is removal at common. And then I've just noticed I've just given all 3 of the best red commons to removal spells, but red's removal just is very good in this set. We've got Scorching Dragonfire. 1 in a red for an instant, deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. If that creature or planeswalker would die this turn, exile it instead. Now this is a reprint, of course, and it was good last time. It'll be good this time, especially given that this set has Delirium. So you're maybe denying them creature or artifact or enchantment if it's one of those types when you exile off of this removal. But just 2 mana for 3 damage and instant speed is good in general. Next, we're going to talk about the best red uncommons. We're going to start with Piggy Bank. 1 in a red for a 3/2 artifact creature, Boar Toy. When Piggy Bank dies, create a treasure token. So, 2 mana 3/2, just a good rate. Artifact card type, contributing to Delirium. Sorry, my dog's just rolling around behind me. And then, the fact that it makes a treasure token when it dies is going to let you maybe cheat on mana on a later turn a slight bit. So I think this card is just generally very good. 2 mana 3/2s are just generally quite good. Then we've got Untimely Malfunction, a card that I think is valuable for its flexibility. It's 1 in a red for an instant, choose 1, destroy target artifact, change the target of target spell or ability with a single target, or 1 or 2 target creatures can't block this turn. Now, this card, that second mode especially, you have to consider in recent years, especially because of Magic Arena, more and more of the removal spells they've been designing have said, say, opponent controls, just to avoid them like glowing on your opponent's turn. Glowing if you're the only one who controls a creature and making you like pass through the turn manually. Stuff like that to kind of as a concession to digital Magic. So that effect is not as good as it might have been a while ago, but I think the flexibility on this card more than makes up for it. A lot of the creatures happen to be artifacts. There are relevant artifacts you can blow up with that first mode, and when you do get to redirect a removal spell from your own creature to your opponent's creature, that is just a crazy, crazy value for 2 mana. And then lastly, we've got Pyroclasm. Now, this is a reprint, and a reprint that is pretty crazy to have legal in Standard and Pioneer. This is a powerhouse, still sees play in modern sideboards, even through all of the Horizon sets rotating modern. It's 1 in a red for a sorcery, for those who don't know. Pyroclasm deals 2 damage to each creature. So this card is going to be insane in some matchups and not so useful in other matchups, but I think in Limited this card leans toward being good. If your opponent is going wide, this can be like a 2-for-1, 3-for-1. You just have to make sure, like any, you want to think of it as a board wipe, right? You want to set it up so that it benefits you more than it benefits your opponent. Of course, you need to be aware that you're playing with it, but that's a low bar. This card's very powerful. Next, we've got the best green commons. So we're going to start with Manifest Dread, one we mentioned earlier. So it's 1 in a green for sorcery, Manifest Dread. That is, again, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put 1 on the battlefield face down as a 2/2, and 1 into the yard. Turn it face up anytime for its mana cost if it's a creature card. So this is going to just intersect with a lot of the limited archetypes really well. We've got a limited archetype built around Manifesting Dread. We've got a limited archetype built around Delirium. This card puts a card in the yard. This is just generically a very good 2-drop. It's a 2-mana 2/2 that you can potentially flip up later. So I think Manifest Dread is just, you're going to feel very happy running any number of copies of this. And then we've got Monstrous Emergence. This is 1 in a green for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, choose a creature you control or reveal a creature card from your hand. Monstrous Emergence deals damage equal to the power of the creature you chose or the card you revealed to target creature. So this is an interesting iteration on the Bite spell. It's a little bit better because if they remove the thing in response, you have still noted a power for this card. So you're still going to get to deal that damage, as opposed to a traditional Bite spell where if they remove it in response, it's no longer there to deal the damage. Because it had to be targeted. This doesn't target the creature, and you also notably, you don't have to have the creature on the battlefield, right? If you just have a big creature in your hand, then this becomes a removal spell that deals a ton more damage. So I think this card's great. And then we've got Slavering Branch Snapper. Now this is part of a cycle. of basic land type cyclers, but this is 4 and double green for a lizard with trample. It's a 7/6, and it's got forest cycling too. So if you're playing kind of a greedy deck, maybe you're splashing a third color, these land cyclers will come in handy. But just being a 7/6 for 6 with trample is decent enough. This lets you, if you have a few of these, you can cut a land, which feels pretty good, gives you some flexibility. So I think this card's a very solid common. Next, we're going to move into the best green uncommons. I'm going to take a sip of my water before we get started. We've got Break Down the Door, one of the few horror movie references I actually do get. It is 2 and a green for an instant. Choose one. Exile target artifact, exile target enchantment, or manifest dread. So this kind of looks a lot like that counterspell that we saw in the best blue cards, in that you have the fallback of being able to manifest dread if the other modes don't pan out. However, the fact that it exiles artifacts or enchantments is very big in a set with Delirium. Your opponent is going to be if your opponent cares about Delirium at all in their deck, they're going to be relying on those enchantment creatures and artifact creatures dying to get those extra, more awkward card types in the yard. So if you're exiling them instead of killing them, then that is relevant text. But yeah, just this floor of this card being Manifest Dread at instant speed for 3 mana makes it feel pretty solid. And then we've got Under the Skin, really cool Fernando Falcone art here. I apologize if I pronounced that name wrong, but this art is very nice. 2 and a green for a sorcery. Manifest Dread, you may return a permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So notably here, this does not target, and the action is done after the Manifesting Dread is done. So when you Manifest Dread, if you see a permanent you like in there, you can dump that permanent in the graveyard and then return it to your hand using the second half of this card's text. So, there's some value there. And I think the best way to look at this really is similar to an Eternal Witness, but like the body is way better than Eternal Witness because it has 1 more toughness and it could potentially flip into something very good. In limited, often enough, the thing you're going to want to return is going to be a permanent anyway. So I think Under the Skin is a very powerful uncommon, and you're definitely going to want to play the copies that you get. And then lastly, we've got Defiant Survivor. This one's 2 and a green for a 3/2 human survivor. With Survival, at the beginning of your second main phase, if Defiant Survivor is tapped, Manifest Dread. So that's huge. This is one you're going to want to try to protect because it creates bodies, it puts things in the graveyard. It just does a crazy amount if you are able to get in with it. So in a deck that's heavy in removal, that can clear the way for this to get in a deck that is heavy with ways to protect this, like we saw the white common that gives +1 indestructible to a creature, that kind of thing, this card is going to show out in a crazy way. So those were the best commons and uncommons, in my opinion, in each color for you to just play in general decks. Now we're going to go over all the signpost uncommons, and we're going to talk about each of the archetypes. Now, I'm not going to read all the cards, but I am going to read both of the signpost uncommons for each color pair. And yes, I said both of the signpost uncommons. This set is similar to a set like, say, March of the Machine, where each color pair has 2 different signpost uncommons. Now, I think what this is indicating, along with the fact that there is a cycle of common fixing lands, and a set of land cyclers, is that this is intended to be a set where you can very liberally splash a 3rd color. So keep that in mind as you're drafting your decks. You can get a little greedy, you can, make some pivots that might not pan out, because you might be able to feature them in the final deck via a splash. So we're going to talk about all of these signpost uncommons and go over how I think the limited archetypes are going to pan out. So the first deck we're going to talk about is green-white Survival/Go Wide. So one of our signpost uncommons here is Shrewd Storyteller. It's 1, a green and a white for 3/3 human survivor with survival. At the beginning of your second main phase, if Shrewd Storyteller is tapped, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So that's not just itself. It can buff itself if you want it to be able to continue to survive combat, but it can also put that counter on a more valuable creature, maybe something with keywords. So that flexibility is very, very valuable. And then here's a couple commons that might go in the deck if you want to pause to read those. And then the other signpost uncommon is Baseball Bat. It's a green and a white for an equipment. When it enters, attach it to target creature you control. Equipped creature gets +1/+1. Whenever equipped creature attacks, tap up to 1 target creature, and then you can re-equip this for 3, but remember, it does come in for free when it comes out. And the notable thing for Baseball Bat is that you do not have to tap the creature that is attacking. So if you have a creature with a valuable survive ability, say for instance the one that Manifest Dread that we looked at when it survives, you can put this Baseball Bat on a creature you care about less, and actually instead of using the ability to tap your opponent's creature, you can tap your own creature and trigger that survival ability. But I think what will most often happen is your opponent has one thing that can block your survivor creature, and you just use this attack trigger to tap that, so that your survivor creature can get in unscathed and trigger that survivor ability on the second main. All in all, I think this deck is going to be like the most able to go into the mid-game aggro deck in the limited format, right? It's not going to be all in like the other aggro deck, there are a couple other aggro decks. I think this one will be the most capable of going into the middle game, the most capable of potentially like stealing a win off of tapping down your opponent's creatures, generating a little bit more value than the other aggro decks. I'm very excited to play with this one. I think there's going to be some very interesting things going on. We've also got this Fear of Exposure is another way to tap your creatures, as is Orphans of the Wheat. So there are plenty of ways in this set to tap your creatures other than combat, and you're going to want to look into those. Next we have white-blue enchantments, cards with Eerie. So this first card is Gremlin Tamer. It's a white and a blue for a 2/2 human scout with Eerie. Whenever an enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room, create a 1/1 red gremlin creature token. So, just a sort of a young pyromancer for gremlins, for enchantments. And then we've got Inquisitive Glimmer, a white and a blue for a 2/3 enchantment creature, Fox Glimmer. Enchantment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Unlock costs you pay, cost 1 less. So this is sort of reminiscent of the green-white Signpost Uncommon from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, which was pretty solid in its format. It doesn't have lifelink, but it does have 1 more toughness, and I think that's a little bit more relevant, because this is going to dual combat a little bit better. But yeah, the fact that it discounts your room costs later is very helpful. This is just going to let you play your enchantments faster, and that's going to include a lot of creatures that have a big effect on the board state, because there are some powerful enchantment creatures in the set, so just generally good. And what you're going to want to be doing with this deck is triggering your Eerie abilities with cheap enchantments. You've got this guy that can bounce permanent to its owner's hand, which might let you reuse the ETB effect of one of your rooms, things like that. And generally, it's just going to be kind of a value-generating mid-range deck built around triggering those Eerie abilities. I'm excited to play this deck as well, and I think it'll be relatively flexible. This is a deck that's demanding a specific card type, so it's going to be maybe a little bit harder to have come together than some of the other decks, but I think it'll be fine. I think it has some very powerful payoffs. Next, we've got the other Eerie deck. It's blue-black, and this one's more of a control deck. So we've got Skull Snap Nuisance, blue and a black for a 1/4 insect skeleton with flying and Eerie, surveil 1. So whenever an enchantment you control enters and whenever you fully unlock a room, you surveil 1. So this card is a great blocker, and then once you've kind of taken control of the game, it's a 1-power flyer that can keep hitting your opponent while you sort of dig to make sure that you've got control of the game. And then you're kind of playing these rooms, you're playing these enchantments that generate value or that are removal. And then we've got Fear of Infinity, another sort of piece of inevitability. It's 1, a blue and a black for a 2/2 nightmare enchantment creature with flying, lifelink. Fear of Infinity can't block, and whenever an enchantment you control enters and whenever you fully unlock a room, you may return Fear of Infinity from your graveyard to your hand. So this is just like, you're going to want to remove your opponent's flyers because a 2/2 flying lifelink is just a really, really solid clock. And if it ever dies, you can get it back pretty easily, and that's gonna be tough for your opponent to come back from. A 4-point life swing every turn is while you are hopefully maintaining control over the board state is going to be tough for your opponent to overcome. So I think that's going to be what the deck is built around. You have a little flyer that can chip in while you are maintaining control of the game. And then we've got Black-Red Sacrifice. So this archetype is probably the most common archetype in Black-Red, but there's usually a twist. And in this case, the twist is that the sacrifice cards also allow you to sacrifice enchantments. So we've got Sawblade Skin Ripper. 1, a black and a red for a 3/2 human assassin with menace. 2, and sacrifice another creature or enchantment. Put a +1/+1 counter on Sawblade Skin Ripper. At the beginning of your end step, If you sacrifice one or more permanents this turn, Soulblade Skin Ripper deals that much damage to any target. So 1 damage to a target is not going to kill most creatures. You're going to be sending it at your opponent's face. But in the cases where you happen to get to sack 2 things, being able to maybe kill a 2 toughness creature is very relevant. But just a 3 mana, 3/2 menace is a pretty solid body. I do think this is one of the weaker Signpost uncommons. I don't love the rate that it gives you that counter at, and that the payoff, in order to actually generate value, you're going to need to give up something very significant. But that does kind of indicate where the deck is going. It's a more aggressive deck, and it's built around sacrificing creatures and enchantments. So most often, like, the enchantments are going to be rooms where you already did the cheaper room effect, or the room effect with an ETB is over. Then we've got Disturbing Mirth, which is a black and a red for an enchantment. When it enters, you may sacrifice another enchantment or creature. If you do, draw 2 cards. When you sacrifice Disturbing Mirth, manifest Dread. So this card, it is going to... most often, you're going to be, like, sacking a cheap creature, sacking a room you're done with, whatever, to draw 2 cards. And then this thing sits around and waits to get sacked and gives you a 2/2. I also think this one is a little bit hard to line up. It's really asking you for a lot. So both of these Signpost uncommons are kind of a miss for me. If I had to put money on which archetype I think would be the hardest to make come together, it would be black-red in this particular set. But if you can pull this off, it does give you a pretty good rate. I just think there are Signpost uncommons in this set that are doing more and asking less of you in terms of deck building than either of the ones in black-red. But I'm willing to be proven wrong. This is probably the deck I'm least excited to play. And we've got red-green Delirium Stompy. This is the other aggro deck, but it's, Stompy aggro deck. It deals with a little bit more, like, higher curve cards. So Wildfire Wicker Folk, red and a green for a 3/2 artifact creature, Scarecrow with haste. And Delirium, Wildfire Wicker Folk, gets +1/+1 and has trample as long as there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard. So, just a 3/2 haste for 2 is very solid for a Signpost uncommon. And if you can get that Delirium, which is easier if you're filling your deck with cards like this that are artifact creatures, if you're playing some Manifest Dread, if you're playing some cards that let you loot, this is a 4/3 haste for 2. And at that rate, that's not going to be happening on turn 2, but that rate is pretty solid, for a later turn where you're just kind of have 2 extra mana lying around. It can really apply pressure to your opponent. But we've also just got these 2 drops that are a little bit above curve that either help you get Delirium or give you a payoff for Delirium as far as their stats when attacking. And then we've got Beastie Beatdown, red and a green for a sorcery. Choose target creature you control and target creature an opponent controls. Delirium, if there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, put 2 +1/+1 counters on the creature you control. The creature you control deals damage equal to its power to the creature an opponent controls. So this is a mouthful. I trust that it had to be worded this way, or else I'm sure they wouldn't have. It's a very difficult card to read, but it is basically a bite spell, except before the bite. If you have Delirium, you get to put 2 counters on your creature, and those counters are permanent, not just a buff for the turn. So it is adding to the board. It is contributing to your aggro game plan by buffing a creature that you can then attack with because you just got rid of a blocker. So I think this card's going to line up very well in this deck. And then we've got blue-red rooms. Now, this one is weird. So, Intruding Soul Rager is the first Signpost uncommon. It's a blue and a red for a 2/2 Spirit with Vigilance. Tap, sacrifice a room. Intruding Soul Rager deals 2 damage to each opponent. Draw a card. So I think what they're envisioning here is, again, you have these rooms that are, most of the value is concentrated in the ETB effect. We're looking at Glassworks or Slimy Aquarium being, like, good examples. And then the idea being that once you have worked through the ETBs of these rooms, you can cycle them away and shock your opponent. And that's fine, I think. But this Signpost uncommon, sacrificing a room specifically, is just asking a lot. And then this is the other Signpost uncommon, and it's the only one that's not, like, multicolored in the traditional sense, in that it is a room that is split between 2 colors. So we've got Smoky Lounge, 2 and a red. At the beginning of your first main phase, add double red. Spend this mana only to cast room spells and unlock doors. And then Misty Salon. When you unlock this door, it's 3 and a blue. When you unlock this door, create a XX blue spirit creature token with flying, where X is the number of unlocked doors among rooms you control. So by itself, that's only going to be a 2/2 flyer. I really do not see this. I don't think this card's very good. I think when you are looking at the blue-red rooms deck, it really is going to be just like a tempo deck that is, maybe using that previous signpost uncommon if you have a lot of rooms that you're comfortable sacking after you get the value out of. This deck I'm also having a hard time seeing come together. It feels like it's going to be dirtling too much. It feels like it's going to be playing rooms where, like, in order to synergize enough with the things the deck is asking you to do, you are going to be having to play cards that are not the sum of their parts in terms of how much mana you're paying for them. So I have a hard time seeing this deck pan out. But if it does, I think it'll focus less on rooms and be more just a tempo deck. And then we've got red-white, go wide aggro / 2 power. So we're going to start with one of the signpost uncommons, which is Arabella, Abandoned Doll, red and a white for 1/3 legendary artifact creature toy. Whenever Arabella Abandoned Doll attacks, it deals X damage to each opponent, and you gain X life, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 2 or less. So that's, of course, going to count itself. So if it attacks by itself, it's going to drain your opponent for 1. But there are also a ton of other creatures with power 2 or less in the set that Arabella can proc off of, and it's just off of you controlling them. So I think this is an insane aggro card. If you have a way to protect it, and even if you don't, you can just like end up hitting your opponent for a ton without them being able to do anything just by attacking with this card late in the game. You've got this Most Valuable Slayer, very good creature for pushing through damage, this 4-drop, and you've got other cards that, pay you off for 2 or less power, or find cards with 2 or less power. We're going to go into the other signpost uncommon, which is Midnight Mayhem, 2 red and a white for a sorcery. Create 3 1/1 red gremlin creature tokens. Gremlins you control gain menace, lifelink, and haste until end of turn. So it's giving you a bunch of creatures that can trigger your things that care about power 2 or less, as well as just letting you get some damage in with the menace, haste, and lifelink, making them hard to block, maybe setting you up for an alpha strike. I think this is definitely the most all-in aggro deck. It is the one that is the most likely to kill your opponent quickly, but also the one that is going to be the hardest to go into the late game with. I don't tend to like playing those in limited. They make me a little nervous. It's always a bummer when you run out of steam, but this deck does look like it can really punch through really quickly. So that is the red-white archetype. We're going to move on to the white-black archetype, Reanimator. Now, it's pretty rare we get to see a Reanimator deck in a limited format, but when they do, they're always an interesting puzzle to figure out. So we're going to start with Rite of the Moth, which is the first signpost uncommon. It's 1 white, double black. Beautiful AM Sartor art here. Sorcery. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. And then flashback 3 white, white, black. I don't really feel like the finality counter clause was that necessary here. I mean, it makes sense to put it on things that can do it over and over again, so you're not reanimating the same thing over and over again. But this just reanimates a thing and then flashes back, so I really don't see why it needed that finality counter. But be that as it may, it is there. 4 mana to reanimate something is a standard rate and limited. It feels a little rough to pay it. But the fact that you could flash this back is pretty good. And what you're often going to find yourself doing in this format, there are a lot of reanimator spells in the format, and it seems like the sort of going rate is 5 mana typically. But there are plenty of spells that let you mill. If you manifest Dread, that's a way to put potential reanimator targets into the yard, things like that. That'll make it relatively easy to make sure that you're actually getting a discount with your Rite of the Moth rather than reanimating something that just costs 4. And then we've got the other signpost uncommon is sort of a reanimator target, and that's Shroud Stomper. 3 double white, double black, so 7 mana. For 5/5 elemental with Death Touch. Whenever Shroud Stomper enters or attacks, each opponent loses 2 life. You gain 2 life and draw a card. So that ETB and attack trigger is pretty crazy. A 4-point life swing and drawing a card is just feels great. It's going to be hard to outpace that, both on card advantage and on the life swing on the part of your opponent. So this is probably the best uncommon in terms of how it feels to reanimate it. And you're going to want to get these. I really do see it being possible, even though white's removal is a little rough in this set, I do see it being possible to have a white-black control deck that just keeps stems the bleeding until you get to 7 mana to cast this Shroud Stomper and turn the game around. I think that deck will also be quite fun to play. But yeah, this white-black Reanimator will be an interesting puzzle to solve, getting those targets into the graveyard primarily being the struggle, and then, getting a cheaper rate on crazy cards like Shroud Stomper. And then we've got black-green Delirium. So this is a Delirium deck that's more mid-range oriented. It's less aggressive. We're going to start with a Brood Spinner. Black and a green for a 2/3 spider with reach. When Brood Spinner enters, surveil 2. So that's going to help you fuel your Delirium. And then for a black and a green, tap, sacrifice Brood Spinner, create a number of 1/1 black and green insect creature tokens of flying equal to the number of card types among cards in your graveyard. So this doesn't technically say Delirium because it doesn't demand 4 types specifically, but it is one of the rare cards in the set. I mean, it's uncommon, but it's one of the few cards in the set that is going to allow you to go beyond 4, right? If you have 5, even 6, although that's hard to do in limited card types in your graveyard, you get even more flyers. Relevant to state that this is not locked to sorcery speed like a lot of these token creation abilities are these days. So you can, leave this up, block with it, and then make the flyers to swing on your turn, or you can crack it on your opponent's turn, make the flyers, split them up, block with them, get some favorable blocks that way. But just a 2/3 reach that surveils 2 and it comes in for 2 mana is very powerful. So, you can just consider it there. And then next we've got Drag to the Roots. That's the other Delirium signpost uncommon for green-black. It's 2, a black and a green for an instant, but it costs 2 less to cast as long as there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, and it destroys target non-land permanent. So in limited, 90% of the time that's going to be a creature, but there are some artifacts and enchantments that aren't creatures that are relevant that you can hit, and then there's one Planeswalker even, although he is typically a creature. But basically, Drag to the Roots is just going to give you, a very solid removal spell. If you have Delirium, it becomes a 2-drop. I think the black-green Delirium deck is going to be really interesting. I like playing graveyard decks in Limited, and I think this one will not be super hard to make happen just because of all of the artifact creatures, enchantment creatures, etc. And then last but not least, we've got green-blue Manifest Dread. Now this first signpost uncommon I think is one of the best in the set, maybe the best. Oblivious Bookworm. Green and a blue for a 2/3 human wizard with, at the beginning of your end step, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card unless a permanent entered the battlefield face down under your control this turn, or you turned a permanent face up this turn. This card feels kind of crazy. The baseline of just a 2-mana 2/3 that loots at the end of every turn is very good. Every deck wants that. But the fact that you don't even have to loot, you just get to draw a card if you manifested Dread, which green and blue have a ton of ways to do at 3 mana, so you curve it after this. As well, if you flip something up this turn. So, it's really not that unrealistic to play this thing on turn 2, manifest Dread on turn 3, trigger it, draw a card on your end step, and then on turn 4, flip the thing you manifested up, trigger it, draw a card on end step. And if I have to stress, if you're not doing that, you're just looting off of your 2-mana 2/3. So this card feels insane in Limited. It feels like a crazy signpost uncommon. I'm really surprised they didn't make it like a 2/1 or something. And then the other signpost uncommon in blue-green is, of course, Growing Dread. Green and a blue for an enchantment with flash. When Growing Dread enters, manifest Dread. And whenever you turn a permanent face up, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So a lot of the power in this card is just a 2/2 with flash that puts something in the graveyard. You can flash this in and trade. You can flash this in and potentially eat a 1-power creature. You can flash this in, see what you get, flip it over on your turn, ready to attack. With a +1/+1 counter. This card's just very flexible. Obviously, it's not as good as the other signpost uncommon in blue-green, but not much is. That card is pretty crazy in Limited. And green-blue really does have a ton of ways to manifest Dread, but the fact that the signpost uncommons are so self-sufficient, this one because it actually manifests Dread itself, and the other one because it loots if you didn't, makes it so that while this does call out a specific mechanic for its payoff, it really does not falter if you don't have a ton of access to that specific mechanic in your deck. And then we're going to discuss the best bombs in the set. I've picked 6 rares and 3 mythics that I think have the biggest singular impact on the game. I'm going to go over what they do so you're aware, so you know to pick them in drafts, so you know what they are when you play against them. So the first rare is actually a 2-drop. Now, I'll note before we go over these that I really don't think this set is very bomby in general. I don't think this is a March of the Machine where you have a ton of rares that are just going to obviate everything that happened in the game before them, like Atali or Sunfall or Galta and Mavrin. I really do think this set is pretty back and forth. I don't think there's a lot of bombs that will sort of tear the game in half when they come in. But with that said, we're going to talk about this first bomb, Silent Hall Creeper. 1 and a blue for a 1/1 enchantment creature horror, can't be blocked. Whenever Silent Hall Creeper deals combat damage to a player, choose one that hasn't been chosen. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on Silent Hall Creeper. Draw a card. Silent Hall Creeper becomes a copy of another target creature you control. So what you're going to do with this is you're either going to put the counters on it or you're going to draw the card first, then you're going to do the other one of those, then you're going to make this a copy of the biggest creature you have, but it has 2 counters on it. If they don't answer this, it's pretty brutal. You're going to have to decide, like, am I the beatdown? If so, I want to put the counters on this first. Or is this going to be a more value-oriented game? If so, I want to draw the card first, because you want to make sure which one you're doing. If you don't think they have removal, you want to put the counters on it first, obviously, because then you have a 3/3 unblockable, and you just get the card next turn. If you do think they have removal, you want to get the card off of it so that you've 2-for-1 them. But this card's just generally very good, I think. And then we've got Kona, Rescue Beastie. 3 and a green for a 4/3 Beast Survivor. At the beginning of your second main phase, if Kona, Rescue Beastie is tapped, you may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. So if you attack with this, they kind of have to block it, because if they don't, if you just have anything else, you get to put it in for free, which is pretty crazy. So I think Kona is very solid. We've got Dissection Tools. This is kind of crazy. This is 5 mana equipment. When Dissection Tools enters, manifest Dread, then attach Dissection Tools to that creature. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has Death Touch and Lifelink, and equip, sacrifice a creature. So this is Batterskull, except instead of a germ, you're just getting, it's a 2/2, and then the equipment just gives +2/+2. But also, the ability to instant speed flip that creature up and have it keep the +2/+2 Death Touch Lifelink will be really brutal a lot of the time. And then the re-equipping for sacrificing a creature, I think, is a good design, because it makes it so you can't just put this on other things infinitely. Right? You have to have something lying around that you don't mind sacking. That's not always going to be the case. But just, even if you're unable to re-equip this, just the rate that you get on it, with the initial body and then the ability to potentially flip over if you hit a creature, is just really insane. So I think that Dissection Tools is very solid. And then we've got Valgavoth's Onslaught. XX green sorcery. Manifest Dread X times, then put X +1/+1 counters on each of those creatures. So for 3 mana, you're just going to get to Manifest Dread with a +1/+1 counter, so you're going to get a 3/3. For 5 mana, you're going to Manifest Dread twice and put 2 +1/+1 counters on each of those creatures. So for 5 mana, you are already getting 2 4/4s. Not to mention the fact that those can flip over and potentially be just bigger creatures with those 2 +1/+1 counters. Obviously, once you get into 7 mana, you're getting into really nutty territory. You're getting 3 5/5s. But even just casting this for 5 feels crazy. 2 4/4s unlimited for 5 mana, with that upside of them being face down. You're putting things in your graveyard. This card's just an insane rare. And then we've got a rare room, Roaring Furnace / Steaming Sauna. Roaring Furnace is 1 and a red. Whenever you unlock this door, this room deals damage equal to the number of cards in your hand to target creature an opponent controls. And then Steaming Sauna, 3 and double blue. You have no maximum hand size at the beginning of your end step. Draw a card. So this is just a very, very solid removal spell. And then later on, you don't have anything else to do with your mana. Here's an extra card every turn. And you're going to get one of those cards immediately. So I think this card is a very, very solid rare, just for the flexibility, and just for, just the red side of this card is fine. Like, you just play it as a removal spell. And then if you're in red-blue, you also get this insane extra benefit. And then the last rare bomb we're going to talk about is Ghostly Dancers. 3 and double white for a 2/5 spirit with flying. When Ghostly Dancers enters, return an enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand, or unlock a locked door of a room you control. And then Eerie. Whenever an enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room, create a 3/1 white spirit creature token with flying. So the best thing that you're going to do with this is you're going to have a room out. You're going to unlock the room immediately, so you can immediately get that 3/1 flyer and, you know, have just a great rate here. What ends up being like 5-6 and flying stats for 5 mana, as well as you got that room unlocked for free. But even if you're returning an enchantment from your graveyard to your hand and risking them killing the Ghostly Dancers before you get to make your 3/1 flyer, you've at least 2-for-1'd them. So, you know, the bad scenario for Ghostly Dancers is still quite good. Then we've got the 3 Mythic Bombs I've chosen. Really, the whole Overlord cycle is insane. I've chosen the white one to stand in, but the red one's crazy, the green one's solid, the blue one's solid, the black one's very good, the white one's just the most insane one. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We're going to start with Hauntwood's Shrieker, 1 and double green for a Beast Mutant, 3/3. Whenever Hauntwood's Shrieker attacks, manifest Dread. 1 and a green, reveal target face down permanent. If it's a creature card, you may turn it face up. So basically, it's a 3/3 that makes 2/2s and, you know, pitches cards to your graveyard when it attacks. And then, not only do you get to look at your opponent's face-down creatures, just in case, if you have the extra mana lying around, but the big utility in this is that, you know, on the turn that it attacks and you manifest Dread, you can put as expensive of a thing as you want face-down. This is going to be able to immediately turn it face-up for 2 mana, which is just a crazy rate. Right? And it doesn't have to connect, it just has to attack. So this card just generates value in a way that spirals out of control super fast, lets you cheat on mana on the things that you manifest in. Just an insane card. And then speaking of insane cards, that's what the bomb section of the video is for. We've got Kaito, Bane of Nightmares, our singular Planeswalker for the set. It's 2 a red and a black for legendary Planeswalker Kaito, with 4 loyalty, and it's got ninjutsu for 1 a blue and a black. So for those who don't remember ninjutsu, you can return an unblocked attacker you control to your hand, or its owner's hand, and pay the ninjutsu cost to put this card onto the battlefield from your hand tapped and attacking. Now this is a planeswalker, so how does it attack? During your turn, as long as Kaito has 1 or more loyalty counters on him, he's a 3/4 ninja creature and has hexproof. So when you ninjutsu him in, he's a 3/4 that gets to, you know, hit your opponent. They can't target him, and then you're going to get to activate him at least once. His +1, you get an emblem with ninjas you control get +1/+1. So in this set, that's just referring to Kaito himself. 0, surveil 2, then draw a card for each opponent who lost life this turn. -2, tap target creature, put 2 stun counters on it. It is hard to imagine a game where this comes down off the ninjutsu on turn 3 and you don't just win, right? If your opponent even has a creature, you can tap it and put 2 stun counters on it. Whether they do or don't, you can just surveil 2 and draw a card because this guy just hit them. And he can buff himself. This card's just very, very, very powerful. I believe he also stops being a planeswalker while he's a creature. So he can still activate these loyalty abilities. But he also, like, if he gets blocked, he doesn't lose loyalty from taking damage. I'm fairly certain, because the other planeswalkers that have abilities like this are templated. It is still a planeswalker, meaning that when it takes damage, you remove that many loyalties. Then we've got Overlord of the Mistmoors, 5 and double white for a 6/6 Avatar Horror with Impending for 2 and double white. Whenever Overlord of the Mistmoors enters or attacks, create 2/2/1 white insect creature tokens with flying. So 4 mana for 2/2/1 flyers is already a great rate. And then just 4 turns later, you just get a 6/6. You get a Grave Titan, except the zombies are flying. You know, hard to beat. Very, very powerful rate. You know, you're not often going to be hard casting this because it costs 7, right? But just 4 mana for the 2/2/1 flyers, and then eventually you get to probably win. You just, you know, get to peel off the last counter. And this is a 6/6 that is making 2 more 2/1 flyers every time it attacks. It's just crazy. So those are my vote for the 3 best Mythic bombs. And we're going to wrap things up with some tips and tricks for the format. I've only got 2 tips and tricks for you. One of them I kind of already alluded to. There's a cycle of land cycling creatures. There's 1 in each color at common, and they all land cycle for 2s. You've got the Island Cycler here, Daggermaw, Megalodon, but there's also a Black Swamp Cycler, a Green Forest Cycler, which we saw. There's a Red Mountain Cycler, and a White Plain Cycler. And then on top of that, there's this cycle of lands that tap for 2 colors. They come in tapped, they're common, and they enter tapped unless a player has 13 or less life. So you or your opponent. And I don't think that's going to be too hard to reach, but the point that I'm trying to make here is that similar to March of the Machine, This set is going to be pretty generous, pretty flexible in terms of your ability to splash. It's not going to be like Outlaws at Thunder Junction, where you could regularly make a 4 or 5 color desert pile that was base green. But this is going to be a set where it's relatively easy to build a 3 color deck, say an Esper deck, a Sultai deck, something like that, unifying 2 of the sort of draft archetypes that make sense together. And I think that'll be pretty fun. It was very fun in March of the Machine, barring the very bomby gameplay of that set. That set was super fun to draft, just a Sultai value pile. And I think a similar vibe is going to be attained by this set, although aggro decks do seem positioned to punish those 3-color piles a little bit better than they are in most sets with this easy of a splash. But we'll see how that shakes out. I just want you to be aware of it while you're drafting your decks. And then there's another interesting common and uncommon pair here. Altenac the Thrice Called is 5 and double green for a 9/9 trample. So 7 mana 9/9 trample. Whenever Altenac becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, draw a card. And for 1 and a green, discard Altenac the Thrice Called. Return target land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. This is just an okay card. Just the fact that it can ramp if you have a land in your graveyard is fine, and then it's a great body for 7 mana. But there's also an enchantment a sorcery in the set at common, called Say Its Name, which is 1 and a green for a sorcery. Mill 3 cards, then you may return a creature or land card from your graveyard to your hand. And then you can exile this card and 2 other cards named Say Its Name from your graveyard. Search your graveyard, hand, and or library for a card named Altenac the Thrice Called and put it onto the battlefield. If you search your library in this way, shuffle. Activate only as a sorcery. I think everyone at your local game store in your F&M draft pod is going to be trying to do this day one, so it's not going to work. Everybody's going to get 1 copy of Say Its Name, and then somebody's going to end up with the Altenac, and nobody's going to end up with a functional Altenac package, and they would have been better off just going into a different deck. But I do think this will be something that's really sweet to pull off when it can happen. It is also sort of self-sufficient in that the Say Its Names can mill each other. If you have the Altenac in your hand, you can activate its ability, and then it's in your graveyard, so you're not taking it away with the Say Its Name from your hand. Stuff like that. I think this deck's really sweet. I don't think it's going to be very good. I don't think it's something you really have to worry about. The number of Say Its Names you're going to have to hit in order to even make this happen seems like a big ask even for a common. And, you're not going to just play Say Its Name you're not going to feel great playing Say Its Name by itself, so you kind of have to pick the Altenac first before you commit to that lane. But this is something cool to watch out for. I guess technically the dream is that you just cast Say Its Name on turn 2, you mill 2 more Say Its Names, and then you just immediately get to put Altenac out, and you probably win that game. But maybe not. Just something neat that they threw in that I want you to be aware of. So with that said, let's wrap it up. I want to thank you all for joining me for this limited set review, and most importantly, I want to hear your thoughts. Is there anything you think I missed? Is there anything you're particularly excited to draft? I know personally the deck that I'm most excited about is that blue-green Manifest Dread deck, as well as that Survivor deck, if you can sort of get that going. I love the snap-on equipment, the baseball bat. So there's a lot of... I'm really excited to draft most of the decks in this format. I think this format, as much as I don't like it aesthetically, because of all of the fanny packs and electronic equipment, the stuff that's just not high fantasy, I do really like the mechanics of the set. I think it'll be really fun to play with mechanically. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you find these limited guides helpful or interesting, please feel free to leave a like or a subscribe. It goes a long way toward helping the channel's reach. And thank you for joining me for this limited set review. I hope you have a wonderful day. Good luck at your pre-release. Good luck at all your drafts, and take care.